Hello, you wonderful people of the internet. It is Narishma here with another video, and I'm back from having a huge break where I finished my university studies, graduated, played a lot of Halo, saw like 30 movies, saw the ending to the Wheel of Time, saw the epic online vitriol that has exploded post-finale. More on that later. But I'm finally back with another video, and today we're going to be giving the only objective, definitive ranking to the episodes of the Wheel of Time. If there is anyone else who is in disagreement with me here, I just wanted to say they're definitely completely wrong and have no right to have their own separate opinions. So please don't leave your ranking in the comments because I won't read it. I'm kidding. But yeah, I was inspired to make this tier maker because I saw a tweet by leaking memory here who suggested his ranking, and then he was awesome enough to make this tier maker list. So definitely go give him a follow over on Twitter, and I'm basically going to be using his own tier list, but I made some adjustments here that I wanted to explain a bit before we got started with the only definitive ranking of all the episodes, so bear that in mind. But yeah, S tier is pretty much anything that is really mind-blowing, like 9 or 10 worthy, and I'm just gonna say it out frankly, I almost never give anything a 10 out of 10, so usually a 9 out of 10 for me is like epic or amazing. So that's basically where this is going to be. A is definitely like really solid, like 8 out of 10 or 80% for me is like something that's really good. 7 out of 10 for me is like a B, where it's something that it's still really competent and really good, but not necessarily as good as an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. And then we go to C, which is like a 6 out of 10, which is okay, this could be better. And then we go to D, which is a 5 out of 10, which is just watchable. And then the last category, which I added, which is the Taint, which is 4 out of 10 or worse, which is just something that is making me cringe all the way through, something that I can't barely stand. So hopefully we won't have any episodes here, but yeah, overall I really did enjoy this season, but I guess we're going to see how much I enjoyed it. I didn't like all of the episodes, and I think that is going to be reflected here. So I'm going to be ranking each of the episodes and give some of my thoughts on each one. Granted, I did do some reviews for the first couple of episodes, but I couldn't cover all of them, so consider this like my opinion on the overall season. That's probably how I'm going to title this episode. I don't know. But yeah, let's get started with the first episode, Leave Taking. Leave Taking is like a mixed bag for me. I really do like it, and I understand that they had a lot of ground to cover, but I do think that it is a good episode in just like establishing the beginning of the story. It's very rushed, it's very condensed from what we get in the books, but granted, I don't think you could make a pilot episode with the material here and have like 2 episodes be on Emmons Field, or the 2 rivers as it's called in the show. So I think this episode does an admirable job at, you know, trying to get the story started, giving us some action in towards the latter half of the episode. It's not very good in terms of world building. It's not very good in terms of letting people actually know what the story is about. But I think for outside audiences who are not book readers, it does a nice enough job to leave some doors open and leave you wanting for more. So I think in that sense, it does finish its goal and does so in an admirable way. But for book readers, it's a bit lacking. It has some weird ways of conveying some of the themes and some of the things that should be conveyed here. I'm not going to get into too much of book spoilers just in case. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy it. It's not a Dark One's Taint. It's probably sitting, I will give it an 8 out of 10. I know people hate this episode, but I do think it does a pretty good job. That fight sequence at the end is pretty good. I do think this episode suffers again from many of the things that this first season suffers, which is the condensing of the story into 8 episodes. I think 10 episodes would have helped the season a lot more, maybe even 13 episodes, something like the old Netflix shows got in previous years. But I think most of this review is going to be centered around that same topic. But yeah, overall, I do dig the first episode. Very emotional. Love the narration at the end. Some of the things here and there could be a bit different. Controversial changes to Perrin, controversial changes to Matt. I do understand them. And they do enrich the characters in a certain way that the book doesn't necessarily do, and makes the internal conflicts of each character be more in the forefront. One of the missteps here is I think that we didn't get enough Rand, but we get enough Rand later on in the show, sort of, so it kind of balances out. But overall, I thought this was a very nice way to start the season. Lots of people hate it, but I don't. I actually really like the episode. Let's go to episode 2, Shadows Waiting. This episode had a lot of ground to cover as well. It is also very condensed. It has the Wheat for Manetheren speech, which I thought was going to be omitted, so props for having it in the show. But I also think it was delivered in a way that was great for non-readers, but probably very boring for... it was great for readers, but probably very boring for non-readers, because Maureen just gives a 3 or 4 minute exposition dump, which for us is very thrilling, but for viewers, I think they could have added a flashback sequence to enrich the mythos. And I do get there's additional material outside, but I don't think the show should be depending that heavily on that material, or the YouTubers for that matter, to be explaining these things to casual audiences. And episode 2 also suffers from having to condense everything so thoroughly. I think the Shadow logo sequence was very cool. I like how they showed everything in the sequence. I would have liked to see more death. I would have liked to see maybe even Paran Fain. I don't know. We do get a very heavy hint that he's there. But overall, I think this episode also suffers from having to tell the story in such a condensed way. I do like that it's fairly high stakes with the Trollocs fighting them. The fairy sequence was sort of weird. Not the best visual effects there. The Trollocs do look good in this episode. But overall, again, it kind of suffers from having to do too many things too quickly, whereas if we had probably 2 more hours of storytelling time, we could have spaced this out a bit and have a more compelling episode. But it's not a D. It's not a 5 out of 10. I would probably put it here at B. Or probably here at A, just, I don't know. I'm going to put it at B right now and see how the rest of the episodes shape up. But I initially liked it more than the first episode, but having rewatched it, I do think it's a bit lacking. So I do enjoy it, but it's not my favorite. It's definitely a B out of a 7 out of 10, a B. So yeah, I don't know if you guys completely disagree, but leave that in a comment. Again, you're probably wrong, but okay, let's go to episode 3. Episode 3 has some of my favorite stuff and some of my least favorite stuff. I didn't like the Perrin and Egwene running from wolves. I thought they could have executed this way better. I thought they had scenes of them randomly running through the through nothing, and I thought that was a perfect way to thrust Elias, which is a book character, into the show. And I do know there's some theories that say that he's going to be in season 2, and there's some rumors from casting and stuff, but I do think that they were literally running through nothing for a couple minutes. They could have easily introduced Elias and made that introduction into the wolves, and then the Way of the Leaf and the Tinkerers a bit more organic. And I do think that is where this episode falters, because the Egwene and Perrin stuff, frankly, isn't very enjoyable. I do love the Matt and Rand stuff here. The Matt and Rand stuff here is probably the best we get in the season. Lots of friendship building. Again, Matt is starting to feel that corruption from the dagger, so he's a bit snarky, a bit annoying, but that's all in character. That's all great. I did like the character of Dana. I really didn't like it at first. I was like, yeah, we're not getting some key characters, but we're making up some other characters. But at the same time, I do understand that they're condensing a lot of story here, and a lot of that persecution type feel that we got in The Eye of the World, where everyone could be a dark friend it was basically all encapsulated into Dana's character, and I thought it was fairly well done. I do love Tom. I love the song. I love everything with him in this episode, and I really do understand some of the character choices later on if we get like this version of Tom. You probably know what I'm saying, but I don't want to get into too much of book spoilers. But yeah, I do like this episode, but I think I actually placed it fairly where I wanted to put this already. I thought this was a fairly solid episode. Nothing here really stands out and is like, I love this episode, but I thought it was very serviceable, very middle of the road. Some people love it. Some people feel like I do. I think it's a good episode. I don't think it's my favorite. I just think it's there and had a lot of potential to be way better if some of the choices that they made due to the time constraints would have been better. I don't know if that made sense, but I think this is this thing I'm going to be saying every single episode. They need 1 or 2 more episodes because everything feels rushed and cut, just because they don't have enough time to tell this huge, enthralling, epic story. Now let's go to the place where I'm already saying like the show peaked right here. Episode 4 is my favorite, and it's probably the only one who's going to be an S tier. I think this episode is fantastic from the beginning to the end, and it's so weird because it's one of the episodes where most of it is made up. So a lot of book fans were like, wait, this is new stuff, but I love it. You know, it does feel like the Wheel of Time, and from the first 3 episodes going into the 4th, this was the first episode, I said it back then, where I felt like I was in the world of the Wheel of Time. The first 3 episodes were like, okay, I'm watching the world of the Wheel of Time, but episode 4 was the first episode where I was like, oh yeah, I am in this world, I am in these characters, I am living the story and being heavily engrossed in the mythology and lore. We get the fabulous cold open with Logain, and Alvaro Morte is just like so good here, like so good. Still some nitpicks here and there, like I thought like the channeling could have been done a bit better. The poses that the Aes Sedai make when they are going to link to eventually, like, my spoilers for the show, of course, but to take the 1 power away from Logain. The pose they made, where they crossed their hands, it was like a little Power Rangey to me. It felt kind of cringy, and also like the way Karine Nagashi dies looked really crappy on rewatches. Like I'm being like completely honest, from like a cinematic point of view, it looked really bad. It looked really funny, and it should be something that's impactful. But most people didn't have a problem with that, so I guess it's just a nitpick for me. But yeah, I do think the 1 power could look a bit better. And overall, this episode is pretty much perfect, and I really do like it. I love especially the interaction with Nynaeve and Lan, which are my favorite couple in the books. And to see this relationship developed from an earlier point of view is fantastic, because in the books we don't get to see that as much, because everything is so focused on Rand and Perrin, and we don't really get to see much of this relationship develop, so it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. But here in the show, it starts to build up and it makes sense. So everything in this episode is pretty much amazing, and I think I'm forgetting the whole sequence where Perrin has that talk with Ayla, which I think is the name of the leader of the Tinkers, which was an amazing scene, and is probably still one of my favorites in the entire show. So I think this is where the show peaked, and I hope that season 2 can give us more on this quality, because if it does, this show has immense potential. Like, seeing the leap in contrast from like quality from like the first 3 episodes to this one was amazing. And I think even though it is very different from the books, episode 4 is the one that feels the most like the books, which is crazy to say. Now, moving on to episode 5. This was the first episode where I saw like online vitriol go crazy. Like, this episode is, I love it. Like, it's probably in my S tier as well. I love the drama. I love the sense of dread, the sense of impending doom, sort of, that we have in this episode, because as book readers, we know what is going to happen to Stepan. Some people really don't care about Stepan as a character. I disagree. I thought he was handled very well. I actually wanted him to continue into the series, which would have been awesome. But again, Peter Franzen is a big actor, so I understand, like, for budget reasons, they decided to cut him off early. But I do think this episode is probably the most dramatic and probably my favorite. Not my favorite. It's up there with episode 4, but it's one that I really, really enjoyed because it sets up things that will happen later on in the book series fairly well, and it does so in a way that I at least was attached to Stepan. And on rewatch, it holds up very well. Even though there's not much action, we start to get to see some of the things in the White Tower, and I really enjoyed this episode. I do have my nitpicks, of course, like on every episode. The White Tower felt empty, but then we do find out that every Aes Sedai was basically outside the White Tower with the ambulance seat. Still would have liked to see more people in the White Tower because I always imagine it to be this bustling place full of people moving back and forth, and I kind of like that in this episode. Apart from that, I do think the ending of the fantastic and spectacularly acted funeral sequence at the end of the episode, I do think the ending where Daniel Hannay is, Lan, just like rips off his shirt, that was over the top for me. It was kind of cringy. That's where I kind of draw the line. Like, they should have cut that scene like 2 seconds before, and it would have been amazing. But yeah, the qualm I have with this episode is that I understand what this episode is doing for the future of the show. However, given that the time constraints in the show are so apparent, it was a bit perplexing for me to spend so much time in a story like this where we could have gone it somewhere else and built the characters that will be moving on in the series, such as Rand, Perrin, and Egwene, which all felt criminally underdeveloped. So my qualms here are not specifically with the quality of the episode. It's basically the allocation of time, given that you are very constrained with what you can do. So that would be like one of my negatives of this episode. But overall, I'm actually going to move this here into like top tier A. It's probably like an 8.5 out of 10 for me. But yeah, it's very good. It's a very good episode. One of the strongest of the season. And yeah, it's a shame that people hate it, but I do understand why they do hate it. Now, episode 6. This was the episode that Brandon built up to be the best in the season. And I was really torn on it. I really did enjoy it from a writing standpoint, but I also thought it was like a waste of time from a... I don't want to sound too rough on here, but what I'm saying is that these episodes feel like filler in a season where you can't have filler. It does establish some really important things with the relationship between Swan and Moiraine, which I thought was handled spectacularly well. They heal Matt. They also do the probably weirdest thing that we'll talk about in the end, but there's a lot of filler here in this episode, which I think, given that you have so little time, it's not that the episode itself it's bad. I just think it focuses on things that we might not have focused if we would have gotten more time in the season. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think they should have focused more on building the characters that are central to the story than what they actually did in this episode. But I do think the stuff that we get here is pretty fantastic, and the fact that the whole episode is from Maureen's point of view, I thought was awesome. I thought that seeing the gateway to Angreal was great. I thought that the relationship between Moiraine and Swan was handled fantastically. I do prefer where we get in the books that you don't know right away that they're in league, you know, that you have this like suspicion that they're probably working together, but you don't find that out till like later on. Here it's dropped earlier, so some of that drama is thrown out the window, but we get the character drama, which is pretty great. And overall, I really did enjoy it. The acting in this episode is probably the best in the season. And I do understand why Brandon said that this was the best episode, but I do think it's from a writing standpoint. I do think this was the best written and directed episode out of the bunch, but I do think it kind of loses focus of the story and sets up so many things. It's so focused on setting up so many things that it kind of loses the thread of what should be happening in the episode. Then it kind of just picks up at certain points, and you're like, oh, okay, now we're going. Like, I love the confrontation where Rand kind of squares up against Lan. That's awesome. It's really funny. And then we heal Matt, which was underwhelming. I wanted something a bit more drawn out, but that's probably what we're going to get in season 2. So I'm not going to go ahead of myself and start criticizing the show, because I know we're going to get more Matt Dagger plot in season 2. And then we get the worst thing probably in the entire season, which is how they had to deal with Matt's departure, or Barney Hare's departure, which I hope Barney is doing great. I hope he's safe and having a great start to the year. But yeah, since he left the project after shooting this episode, they were left with a weird choice, because he didn't come back for episodes 7 or 8, as confirmed by several sources. So what we get here is a weird scene where he's left behind, and it looks so bad because it's clearly using like some pickup shots that they had of him, and his reaction is so lackluster because of the fact it looks so weird that it's just very jarring. I don't really know if like people who are on the outside notice this, but I can't help but criticize the show for it, because I'm looking at it not just like a super fan, but I also have to look at it like a technical point of view. And I think this is really poorly done, but I also think this was probably, given the circumstance, the best thing that they could have done. But like overall, really mixed with this episode. I'm going to leave it here at a D, like a 5 out of 10. It's probably one of the least ones I like, but I also think it's a very good episode. You know what? I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, because I don't want to be. No, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because of what happens later on. But yeah, I do enjoy the episode. I do enjoy the acting, the writing, the directing, but I do think it has many flaws, specifically what happens at the end. And also it kind of loses the thread of the plot of the first season and builds up things that we will get later, but you know, it kind of loses track and steam for the current season. So that is basically my criticism for this. Now, when I said the season peaked at episode 4, I kind of forgot episode 7, which was also probably my favorite. But it's not my favorite because we have probably the worst scene in the episode after what happens with Matt. But the love triangle thing just completely doesn't work. It was completely unnecessary, felt rushed, felt unnecessary. Like they were just building drama for the sake of building drama. It felt like a CW type cringy love triangle thing, which I hope like they never touch again. And they kind of allude to it in episode 8 because they have to give it some continuation, but it's definitely going nowhere. But yeah, I absolutely despise that thing, but that's why it's getting a 9 out of 10. I actually do think this episode, while being very non-eventful in terms of what actually goes on, I think it's great because from a world-building point of view, it builds up so much. The scenes between the characters, with exception to the one I hate, are spectacular. The acting is amazing. The writing is great. You feel like everything is going into the climax before the storm hits, which should be in the final episode. We'll get to that later. But everything is sort of building up. And this episode, someone joked, I don't remember who it was, but someone said it was probably should be named Everybody F's. And I agree, because in this episode, everybody F's. Some people were making jokes like it looks like a Mexican telenovela, and I do agree at points, but I do enjoy it, and we get character development, which has been sorely missing this entire season. And I'm being completely honest, the characters have been mostly underdeveloped, with the exception of Nynaeve, which is a standout here. But yeah, I think this episode does a lot to move the plot forward, and we finally get that reveal with a flashback from Winter's Night where Rand carries Tam, and Tam is injured, and in his fever dream, he basically spells out that he is a Dragon Reborn. This episode also starts off the strongest with probably the best cold open, where we get Tigray Mantir, Rand's mom, fighting against, fighting in the blood snow. So that was amazing. Great action set piece. The rest of the episode sort of uneventful, but we get to see other characters like Min. We get to see Rand's reveal, which basically salvaged the episode for me, because it was fun and fine to have like who is the dragon to be a threat through the entire season, but at some point we have to focus on it, specifically because we only have 8 episodes. So focusing on it in the last second to last episode was fine, but getting to finally do it was like, okay, we're done with all these useless conversations of who is the Dragon Reborn, and we finally can admit it's Rand. And then the episode ends in a great scene where basically Moraine and Rand just go off. Rand does a very nice thing and very in-character thing to basically just say, okay, I'm the Dragon Reborn, I'm gonna go with you, and I'm gonna try to save the life of my friends. Which makes sense from a character standpoint, but again, it's very different from the books, and Moraine has to do something with her bond with Lan, which is very weird, and I don't know if it's specifically canon to the books, because she basically masks the bond, and in the books, masking a bond is basically just certain emotions, so the other person doesn't know what you're feeling, but they can definitely know where you are. But in the show, masking the bond basically is almost like if you cut someone off, which is completely different, and it was kind of confusing at first. I was like, what's going on? But I definitely do get the sense that non-book readers did sort of understand what was going on, and that's not a problem for them. But yeah, then we get to episode 8, which is the final episode of the season, and it is by far the best episode in the entire season. It has no problems whatsoever. I love the depiction of the Eye of the World. I love what they did with Rand. I love that I love that little Nynaeve apparently dies, and then I love that Egwene, who is notoriously not known for healing, magically heals her from death. I love all of those things. I love that Lan doesn't do anything in the entire episode and just shows up at the end. I love that somehow someone as, who's been with Moraine such a long time needs help from Nynaeve to find Moraine. I definitely love that Matt isn't in the episode. I definitely love that Rand definitely is sort of underpowered and doesn't do anything in Tarwin's Gap. I definitely love that Lord Agomar apparently is killed. And my favorite thing in the episode was that Loyal is apparently dead. I love all of the things that happened in this episode, and it's definitely the best of the season. Well, if you didn't tell the sarcasm, I hated almost everything in this episode as a book reader, okay? As a book reader, and I'm not a book purist. I am definitely for changes that make things better, and I do agree that the ending of The Eye of the World is really messy, but I do think some of the changes that they made here are just like very what the hell, why, and very confusing, and I do think that the episode is much more easy to understand than the ending to The Eye of the World, but you lose so much of that mysticism and that expansiveness feeling of the world, because in The Eye of the World you don't understand it right away, but going back on it you sort of understand it a bit more. Granted, Robert Jordan didn't have everything set down when he wrote it, but it did feel like there was more to this world that you could know. And in the end of this episode, it kind of feels anticlimactic. And I talked to some of my friends who read the first book, but are not fans of the series, and they kind of agreed. That shout out to Luis and Estefania, by the way, if they're watching this video. But yeah, I talked to them, and they kind of agreed that it was underwhelming as a season finale of television. I did enjoy the channeling. I did enjoy the setup of, Aes Sedai being able to burn out when they use too much of the one power, but I absolutely hated Nynaeve apparently dying. She's definitely not dead, but it felt kind of weird, and it cheapens everything that will follow in the series, because if you show dead characters in a couple of episodes, you quickly start to lose stakes. Like, for example, something that made Game of Thrones so unique was that everyone was expendable, even the main characters. So you have this impending sense of doom in each episode. But here in the Wheel of Time, we get in episode 4, which I do love, don't get me wrong, but we get everyone basically murdered, and then we heal them. And then here we get like Nynaeve basically dead, and they heal her. So we start losing the stakes, and it starts cheapening the potential that the show has to keep viewers on edge. Also, things like, for example, Agomar being supposedly dead. He's not dead. He's filming in Prague as we speak. So again, goes a long ways to cheapening potential character stakes in the future. Loyal, he's also not dead. If he is, though, I am going to have serious problems with this show moving forward, and I'm going to be completely honest. But he's not dead. But again, this goes to like cheapening the future stakes of the show. And what I hated most was probably the treatment of Rand. he does have this nice vision, which is a parallel to something that happens to both Egwene and eventually to Rand in different books in the series moving forward. And it was brought here to like a meh effect for me. It didn't specifically work. I do like the familial connection that Balsamon exploits in the book more than the familial connection made here, because again, the characters were kind of so underdeveloped in the season that you don't have an attachment to their potential relationship. So I didn't really feel just like analyzing purely as a TV show, I didn't feel specifically connected to these characters. And overall, yeah, this episode kind of is a mixed bag. I like, it's not terrible TV, it's just not what I was expecting. And after such a strong episode like episode 7, where it leaves off in a huge cliffhanger, I thought episode 8 was going to deliver, but it just falls short on almost every category. Like, many of the changes are made to give more agency to characters, but then they don't give them agency. Like, for example, Rand does more in the books than he does here. He goes to Tarwin's Gap and just starts blowing stuff up, and that would have been amazing to see. Like, I was waiting to see that. We never got it. Like, for example, Egwene and Nynaeve basically don't do anything in the original ending to the Eye of the World, so they basically are placed in a spot where they do not do anything. They just lend power to Lady Amelisa, which rip Lady Amelisa as well. Another change from the books, which I'm fine with, I guess. Didn't have a connection to her anyways. But again, what I'm saying is, like, Nynaeve and Egwene the changes were maybe to like give them agency, but they didn't get any agency. They just served for setup for future seasons. And then the whole bit with Perrin, I guess it's fine. And I love Johann Myers as Padan Fain is like beautiful, amazing, spectacular. I like that the horn was already here in Faldara. It's changed from the book, sure, whatever, but it sets up the Great Hunt, which is probably my favorite book in the series. And yeah, all the stuff with Johann and Padan Fain was amazing, but I just felt weird and disconnected from Perrin's character arc, because Perrin had basically done nothing with Fain the whole season except just looking at him once in the previous episode. So it was jarring, and I do get that this is because Barney left the project. This episode is a severe victim to COVID and the troubled production that this season had. It felt rushed. The CGI was poor on the Trollocs. It was overall really just a victim to the circumstances. Barney was probably going to have that huge bit with Padan Fain, and I don't know what they were going to do with Perrin, because Perrin also got sidetracked and didn't do much in the entire season after the first couple of episodes. But again, like that plot with the Horn and Padan Fain was definitely going to go to Barney. So it was just a very unfortunate situation that they lost Barney. And then that COVID struck, because everything felt undercooked and underdeveloped. And I do think there is a version of this episode which is better, given some of the changes are like moved around a bit. But as it stands, I do think it's the worst of the season by far. And I did enjoy it, but I also felt like, what the heck did I just watch while I saw it? So while I am giving it the taint, or 4 out of 10, I don't necessarily think it's the worst episode of television history. I do think it's a serviceable episode. I do think it's just very underwhelming, and some of the changes are head scratching. But we'll have to give the show some creative liberty and wait, because probably some of these things are fixed in season 2, and I am hopeful for that. Also, the Shanshan at the end, kind of overkill, but that tsunami wave was like happy to see the Shanshan, because like I do think their race is their culture is fascinating, even though they're despicable. But was happy to see them. Happy for season 2. Season 1 overall, kind of a mixed bag as you're getting here. So I don't know. I did enjoy it. I did feel like I needed more. And again, it all goes back to like, we need 10 or 13 episodes to tell this in a way that is satisfactory and is simply better, because we have so much potential here, but it's just kind of all over the place, because the show feels the need to make these changes which set up future episodes while sacrificing the story. And if you have 8 episodes, that's just something that is going to not come out as good as you want it to do. So I think Amazon really needs to give the show more time to develop and put these ideas forth. So yeah, that is basically my overall impressions of the season. I would give it probably like a 7 out of 10, if I'm being honest, or a 6.5 out of 10. I do think it's way better, for example, than a show like Witcher Season 1. I thought Witcher Season 1 was all over the place and had so much potential for Season 2. And I gave it like a 6 out of 10. I think The Wheel of Time is already better than The Witcher was in Season 1, which that's the reason I'm giving it like a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. But, you know, I'm kind of concerned with some of the changes. I am excited for Season 2, but I'm also like, I don't know if I'm going to love everything here. But yeah, I'm still going to be watching it. I'm still going to be making videos, hopefully. And yeah, I hope you agreed with the only objective ranking of the Season 1. Leave me your rankings, please, in the comment below. And thank you, as always, for supporting the channel and giving it some love. It is Narishma here with probably the first of many videos to come here in this year. So stick around for the channel if you want more stuff and geeky times about the Wheel of Time. And yeah, thanks for watching the video, and I love you all.